For over 30 years, Tim and Neil Finn have been writing and performing some of the finest songs New Zealand's had to offer. Their journeys have seen them work together in bands Split Enz and Crowded House, and also as solo artists. In 1995, the brothers collaborated for an album simply titled Finn, and last year saw the release of the next Finn Brothers record, Everyone Is Here. With more than 25 albums between them, the Finn Brothers are amongst New Zealand's most prolific artists, but it's always been the quality of the songs that has endeared them to their audience. And 30 years on from the release of Split Enz's debut album Mental Notes, the brothers continue to pack out venues the world over and set the standard in songwriting. Becoming household names both at home and abroad was something no one could have predicted when Tim and Neil first started taking an interest in music around the family home in the small town of Te Awamutu.
Music was always there. I mean, we had a little record player, and we had a mum who was pretty musical and a dad who was musical, and they had friends who loved to come around on a Friday night and let off steam after work. Bit of drinking, bit of dancing. A guy, a piano player in the corner, often this guy called Colin O'Brien. He could play any song you like. So we were always used to that party atmosphere and music being live and people losing themselves in it. So it was a great way to get into it.
Even when the party wasn't happening at the Finn household, the young brothers found ways to immerse themselves in what would later become a long-lasting love affair with music.
I remember listening to Beatles records and naively at the time thinking, that's not that complicated. We could probably do that. And then only later you appreciate the huge amount of brilliance that went into the record making. But we fell in love with records. Get Off My Cloud, Rolling Stones, we had that single. We had Love Me Do. We had, what was that song by the Christie? Green, green, the grass is green, on the far side
the 12-string acoustic.
Yeah.
It was like pre-Beatles as well, like Dion the Wanderer, and there was a song called Sailor, which haunted me.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So it just was always there in the corner of the old record player, and turn up the bass full and kind of put your head right inside it. But music was big, and church as well. Like I used to play the organ at church for the congregation way down there, trying to keep in time and that. And lots of music all the time.
The Finn brothers would become known worldwide, not only as highly talented songwriters and musicians, but also as superb performers, something else that came naturally to them at a young age.
We'd be practicing in the hallway. For some reason I have that as a recurring image of that, as having a little pre-performance rehearsal and figuring out the harmonies to like Jamaican Farewell or something, and then you'd go and have to perform for a few of the friends or relatives and that, and it was always quite nerve-wracking, but felt great afterwards. And it's good to conquer the fear.
Oh yeah, I think we learned a bit about harmony singing from our mum, and also these two Scottish priests that used to stay over the summer called the Durning brothers, Father Matt and Father Peter. They used to sing this beautiful song about we are poor little lambs who have gone astray. It's about a World War II kind of bomber plane trying to get home with one wing broken or something, and they used the metaphor of lambs. And that's me, but they had a beautiful harmony thing going, and so we picked it up where we could, and we'd copy it and do it.
So the seeds were sown, and in time, Tim won a scholarship to Sacred Heart College, a Catholic boarding school in Auckland. It was there that he met Mike Chung, with whom he'd go on to form Split Enz. But even though he continued to play while at high school, even Tim wouldn't have imagined how much of an effect music would have on his life.
Yeah, at school I'd always been in bands, but I never thought of it as this is going to be my life. It just seemed like something great to do and really exciting, but it was that leap of faith that had never occurred to me. But there were bands going right back to 3rd, 4th form at Sacred Heart. Me and Mike Chun put several bands together and tried to worm our way into some place where there might be some girls, Barradine kind of folk nights and things.
With music being a passion rather than a career option at this stage, Tim went to Auckland University, where he studied for a degree in philosophy and politics. It was there that he cemented some important friendships that would mark the beginnings of Split Enz.
Well, it took me till I was about 19 or 20 to realise that that's what I wanted to do with my life. And it was meeting Philip Judd, who was going to art school here in Auckland, and Noel Crombie and Rob Gillies, and those guys had a really strong sense of themselves as artists, painters and whatever, and it just inspired me to look beyond what I was in, which was a kind of semi-academic, slightly jaded atmosphere of, I was a bit over schooling, but I didn't know what else to do, and then meeting them really changed my whole world. But I think obviously for Neil it was younger, because he was, I think, at the age of 12 or 13 you were writing songs, weren't you? Whereas it took me till I was about probably 17 or 18 to really start doing that properly.
And so in 1972, Split Enz was born, initially comprising Tim Finn, Phil Judd, Michael Howard, Miles Golding and Mike Chun.
I was sharing a place out at Mission Bay with Phil Judd, and we just started writing songs one night. I can still remember the night, and we wrote 2 songs that night, For You, which was our first single, and Split Enz, which was our kind of theme song. And then we just took it from there, moved around to Kohimaramara about a couple of months later in a place called Malmesbury Villa, which is a rickety old villa that was leaning to one side. And we spent months and months there writing and started doing performing, and it built from that. It built from the songs, and we had these friends like Noel Crombie, who was amazing at putting costumes together. We didn't start wearing those until 73, late 73 into 74. And Rob Gillies, who could play sax, and various people, Mike Chun, who I'd gone to school with, played bass, and Wally Wilkinson, Jeff Chun. These people all started coming into the band, and it was an amazing time. I mean, it changed my life, and I knew that was all I wanted to do. I never had any doubt or fear, even though it took a long time. It took 8 years from 72 through to 1980 before we really kicked in with the public, but we never doubted it through that time. And I think it was because of the strength of that beginning. The beginning was very, very strong, and so there was no problem with momentum.
Split Enz was something exciting and new for the local live scene, and over the next few years the band expanded, adding more personality and instruments as they went. During this time they garnered a strong live following, and as the word spread, so did the confusion about what genre Split Enz fit into and where they drew their influences from.
Erroneously, to some extent, we were described as often as an art rock band and put into a category alongside Genesis and people like that, but even though our keyboard player and drummer were very into Genesis, and we were aware of those bands, Phil and I that wouldn't have been even close to our major influence, because we were kind of contemporaneous with a lot of those bands. And people asked us about Bowie and Roxy Music, but we came up at the same time, so we would have all had the same influences, kind of, which was definitely Beatles and English bands like the Kinks, Small Faces. I mean, you can really hear the Small Faces in some of the things Phil was doing with his vocals.
If it was hard to put Split Enz into a particular genre in the formative years of the band, this only became more difficult around 1974 when they started to wear colourful costumes, theatrical makeup and bizarre hairstyles. A Split Enz show turned into an audio-visual extravaganza, which not only showcased the music but also wild sets and special effects. In 1975 it was time for Split Enz to follow up their live shows with a debut album. Mental Notes was recorded in Sydney and the band signed a contract with Mushroom Records. The album was released in Australia and New Zealand in 1975 and the band relocated to Melbourne, though not for long. The following year, Split Enz moved to London and recorded their sophomore album, Second Thoughts.
My house is sliding into the sea. Hey, skies are grey since you've been away. Chickens aren't laying eggs no more. It can only mean you left me for sure. But I still think of you with more. And Lord, how can I ever repay you? Once you're to me, I still think of you with more. And Lord, how can I ever repay you? Once you're to me, la-do-da, la-do-da-da, la-do-da. My trees are all turning brown. The sun won't shine. Now you're no longer mine. The rats are crawling up me back. It can only mean you're never coming back. But I still think of you when I love. How can I ever repay you for life? Do I still think of you when I love? How can I ever repay you for life? To me, la-do-da, la-do-da-da, la-do-da.
Throughout the 70s, Split Enz worked tirelessly, recording and playing live. It was hard work, but slowly the audience was growing and the reviews were promising. Meanwhile, back in New Zealand, Neil Finn, 6 years Tim's junior, looked on wide-eyed at the adventures of his big brother's band.
And you can just imagine I was at sort of fourth former in Te Awamutu, and these guys were at art school and putting on quite unusual and dramatic performances at venues like Her Majesty's, as it used to be. Was it His Majesty's?
I think it was
I never
his.
remember. His Majesty's.
I think it was his, yeah.
Sort of these buckethead shows. I mean, that was a little bit later. Maybe I was 15 or 16 then. But even so, the shows were like nothing else I'd ever seen. And, you know, there was my brother acting as strange as any New Zealander I'd ever seen, and singing really well. And these songs were quite magical. And they sort of suggested a whole other universe, really. So, yeah, I was completely absorbed in it, taken by it, inspired by it.
Little did Neil know that he would soon be an integral part of the Split Enz family.